It's the morning of September 8th, 1900. You're standing on the beach at Galveston, Texas, watching the Gulf of Mexico churn with a strange, restless energy. The sky is the color of a bruise. The barometric pressure has been falling all night, and the air feels heaviest, electric, wrong. Children are playing in the rising surf. Some residents have come to the shore to watch the waves, treating the approaching storm as spectacle. You notice the water creeping higher than it should, pooling in the streets behind you. By tonight, the city you're standing in will cease to exist. Between 6,000 and 12,000 people will die here in the next 24 hours. It will be the deadliest natural disaster in American history, a record that still stands. And the tragedy is, they were warned. At the turn of the 20th century, Galveston was one of the wealthiest cities in Texas. It was the state's largest port, handling more cotton exports than nearly any city in the world. Its streets had electric lights before Houston did. It had telephones, opera houses, and mansions lining Broadway Avenue. The city sat on a narrow barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico, roughly 27 miles long and less than 3 miles wide at its broadest point. Its highest elevation was barely 9 feet above sea level. Galveston was, in the most literal sense, a sandbar with ambitions. Residents knew hurricanes were possible. Devastating storms had struck the Texas coast before. But Galveston's civic leaders believed their city was protected, shielded by the gradual slope of the Gulf floor, which they assumed would weaken any incoming storm surge. They rejected multiple proposals to build a seawall. It was a decision that would prove catastrophic. Isaac Cline was the head of the U.S. Weather Bureau's Galveston office, a respected meteorologist who had, ironically, once written that a seawall was unnecessary. He argued in an 1891 article that it would be impossible for a hurricane to cause significant damage to Galveston. He would spend the rest of his life regretting those words. In early September 1900, reports began filtering in from Cuba and the Caribbean. A tropical storm had moved across the islands, killing people in its path. Cuban meteorologists warned that the storm was intensifying and tracking toward the Gulf of Mexico. But the U.S. Weather Bureau in Washington, locked in a bureaucratic rivalry with Cuban forecasters, downplayed the warnings. By September 7th, Cline noticed troubling signs. Long swells rolling in from the southeast, unusual tidal patterns. On the morning of September 8th, he made a decision that likely saved hundreds of lives. He rode his horse along the beach, personally warning residents to move to higher ground. But for most of Galveston, there was no higher ground to reach. By mid-morning on September 8th, seawater was flooding the low-lying areas of the city. Wooden sidewalks floated free, streets became canals. Some residents began evacuating across the bridges to the mainland, but many stayed, either unable to leave, unwilling to abandon their homes, or simply unaware of the scale of what was coming. The 3 bridges connecting Galveston Island to the mainland were soon overwhelmed by the rising tide. By early afternoon, they were impassable. The railroad tracks that ran across the bay were submerged. The city was now an island in the truest and most terrifying sense, cut off from the rest of the world. Telegraph lines snapped one by one. The last message sent from Galveston before communications failed was a simple weather report, transmitted around 3:30 in the afternoon. After that, silence. No one on the mainland would know what happened to Galveston for nearly a full day. The hurricane struck Galveston that evening with sustained winds estimated at 130 miles per hour, a Category 4 storm. But it was the storm surge that would prove to be the true killer. A wall of water 15 feet high swept across the island, engulfing everything in its path. The entire city went underwater. Isaac Cline's own home became a refuge for more than 50 people seeking shelter. As the water rose past the first floor, the building groaned under the pressure. Then, sometime after 7:30 p.m., the house was ripped from its foundation by the surge. Cline, his brother Joseph, his 3 daughters, and dozens of others were plunged into the churning darkness. Cline's wife, Cora, was among those pulled into the water. He would search for her for days. Her body was eventually found beneath the wreckage. She was one of the storm's thousands of victims, and her death haunted Isaac Cline for the rest of his life. The storm transformed Galveston's buildings into weapons. Wooden homes shattered into debris that became battering rams, smashing into other structures and the people sheltering inside them. The wreckage formed a massive wall of timber, furniture, and bodies, a grinding, churning mass that rolled across the island with the surge. At St. Mary's Orphanage near the beach, 93 children and 10 nuns of the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word huddled together as the waters rose. The nuns tied clothesline ropes between themselves and the children, hoping to keep them together if the building collapsed. When the orphanage was swept away, nearly all of them perished. Only 3 boys survived. Across the island, similar scenes of desperation played out. Families clung to rooftops. People were pulled from wreckage only to be swallowed by the next wave. Some survived by grabbing onto floating timbers for hours in complete darkness, battered by wind and debris, unable to see or hear anything above the roar of the storm. By morning on September 9th, the storm had passed. Survivors emerged into a landscape that was unrecognizable. Where neighborhoods had stood, there was now a flat expanse of splintered wood, twisted metal, and sand. Bodies were everywhere, tangled in wreckage, draped over fences, half buried in debris. The smell was already unbearable. An estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people were dead. The wide range in the estimate itself tells a story. So many were simply never found, never identified, never counted. Entire families had been erased. In some cases, there was no one left alive to report them missing. The city's infrastructure was obliterated. Roughly 3,600 homes were destroyed. The waterfront was gone. Churches, schools, hospitals leveled. 1/3 of the island had been scoured clean. Survivors wandered through the wreckage in a daze, searching for family, for water, for anything at all. The scale of death created a crisis that no one was prepared for. Initially, authorities loaded bodies onto barges and dumped them at sea, hoping the Gulf would carry them away. But the tide returned them to shore. Galveston's dead kept coming back. Officials made the decision to burn the dead. Massive funeral pyres were erected throughout the city, fueled by the wreckage of homes and buildings. The fires burned for weeks. Soldiers distributed free whiskey to the men tasked with handling the bodies. It was the only way many of them could bear the work. Martial law was declared. Armed guards patrolled the ruins to prevent looting. Clara Barton, then 78 years old, arrived personally to lead the Red Cross relief effort. It would be her last major field operation. Aid poured in from across the country. But the devastation was so complete that recovery seemed almost impossible. What happened next is one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the early 20th century. Rather than abandon the island, Galveston survivors decided to rebuild. and to ensure their city would never be so vulnerable again. They did two extraordinary things. First, they built a seawall. Construction began in 1902, a massive concrete barrier 17 feet high and 3 miles long, later extended to 10 miles. It was the seawall they had refused to build before the storm. The same hubris that had left them exposed now gave way to a fierce, almost defiant determination. Second, they raised the entire city. In an operation known as the grade raising, engineers used dredged sand and fill to elevate buildings, some weighing thousands of tons, by as much as 17 feet. More than 2,100 structures were jacked up on stilts while sand was pumped beneath them. People continued to live in their homes while the work was done. The project took 7 years. Despite this heroic rebuilding, Galveston never fully recovered its former status. The storm had shattered the confidence of investors and shipping companies. When the Houston Ship Channel opened in 1914, connecting Houston directly to the Gulf, the economic center of gravity in Texas shifted permanently inland. Houston grew into one of America's largest cities. Galveston became a quieter place, a resort town, a historical curiosity. The city that had once been called the Wall Street of the Southwest faded from the national stage. Its ambitions drowned, along with its people on that September night. The Galveston hurricane of 1900 transformed how America deals with natural disasters. It exposed the deadly consequences of bureaucratic arrogance, the Weather Bureau's dismissal of Cuban warnings, the city leaders' refusal to build a seawall. It demonstrated in the starkest possible terms that nature does not negotiate with civic pride. The disaster also led to a revolution in Galveston's city government. In the storm's aftermath, the existing alderman system was replaced with a commission form of government, a model that spread to hundreds of American cities and fundamentally changed how municipal government operates in the United States. Isaac Cline continued working for the Weather Bureau for decades. He became one of the country's foremost hurricane forecasters, driven, many believed, by the guilt of having once declared his city safe. He never fully forgave himself for Cora's death. He rarely spoke about that night publicly. Today, the Galveston Seawall still stands, a gray concrete monument to catastrophe and resilience. Tourists walk along its top looking out at the same Gulf waters that swallowed a city. Most of them don't know what happened here. Most of them can't imagine it. But beneath the sand, the dead remain. Construction crews and storms still occasionally unearth bones, fragments of the thousands who were never recovered, never identified, never properly mourned. Galveston's earth is, in a very real sense, a grave. In an era of rising seas and intensifying hurricanes, the story of Galveston is not simply history. It is a warning about the cost of ignoring science, the fragility of coastal cities, and the terrifying speed with which the world we build can be unmade. The water rose once, it will rise again. The only question is whether we'll listen this time.